So good afternoon, everybody. We are happy to see you in the first seminar of the program of the PAGODE Festival. As we are still a group of friends who knows about PAGODE, but for those who are not following on a daily basis the project will end in September. We have been unlucky because of the pandemic. We have not been able to deliver the physical meetings as we had planned to conclude the project. So we decided to transform the conclusion of the project into a range of events. One is the final conference, and for everybody, please put in your agenda 23rd, 24th of September. It will be an online event hosted on Zoom as today, and there is already a draft program available online. The second delivery is a book, which is the catalog of the exhibition. We are preparing an exhibition that unfortunately will not be a physical exhibition in the museum because of the pandemic. We hope to be out of the pandemic in September, but as we all know, this is not exactly in our hands. And last but not least, what we call the PAGODE Festival. The PAGODE Festival, the concept is to give an insight look at the collections that have been gathered during the project. Today is the first seminar of the PAGODE Festival, and we are going to discover the collection of the Finnish missionary who went to China and came back with the beautiful pictures, a testimony of the life in China in the 1900s. The presentation of the collection will be delivered by Ismo Malinen, who is a civil servant at the Finnish Heritage Agency, head of the picture collection, and Ismo is also member of the Finnish Heritage, in representation of the Finnish Heritage Board, is member of Photoconsortium and member of the steering committee of Photoconsortium. So I'm very happy to give the floor to Ismo. Please tell us about your collection. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonella, and I will share my screen, so it will take a minute. Let's see. Now you should see my presentation. So it's really
yes, we see it correctly.
Pleasure and nice to talk to you about our film collection and a bit about our organization and collections in general. So I will tell mostly about our Finnish Missionary organization and its collections, and I will use this term FELM when I'm talking about Finnish Missionary organization. And of course, there's other Finnish missionary organizations at the moment working, for example, in China, but of course this Finnish Missionary organization is the oldest and biggest. And I will talk a bit about some other China-related collections of the Finnish Heritage Agency. But my main topic is, of course, these collections of the Finnish Missionary organization. But there's these topics I will talk you more. First, something about Finnish Heritage Agency and picture collections, but I try to be quite short because I noticed that most of you are quite familiar with our collections, but of course there are someone not so familiar. So a few words about our organization and collections, and then something about these China collections, even some other collections than film, and my main topic is these film collections. And then something about working with these China images. They are combined with these collections of film. And last but not least, I will talk something about what after PAGODE, and especially how all of you and everybody can use our collections and reuse them, because I think this is really important, at least for us. But this is just quite boring slide, but tells a lot about Finnish Heritage Agency and our position in our organization. So a Finnish Heritage Agency, it's founded in 1880s and is one of the governmental bodies or agencies, and is funded and organized under the Ministry of Education and Culture. So we are mainly funded by state funds, but of course funding from different projects and fees from museums and something like that. It's really important for Finnish Heritage Agency. And we have 3 departments. As you can see, National Museum of Finland is one of our departments. It has, of course, lots of collections, lots of different museums and museum services. Then we have Cultural Environment department and archives and information. So picture collections from where I am from is one unit of archives and information department. And besides these 3 main departments, Finnish Heritage Agency has different special units, of which probably this development of the museum sector is most important, because it develops the whole Finnish museum sector and has lots of international networks and work as well. So then about picture collections. So many of you know basic facts about our collections, but it's good to know that we are the biggest picture collection or historical picture collection in Finland. We have about 18 million images of all kinds: photographs, drawings, watercolors, graphic, and prints from 16th century to present day. And we are, of course, documenting important events for, mainly in Finland even today. So we are concentrating, of course, on Finnish history, ethnography, but we have lots of foreign cultures, maritime history, built cultural environment, and Finnish press photo archives. And besides these collections, we are in charge of photographic services for the whole Finnish Heritage Agency, which means that, for example, our photographers take photographs of all the collections of Finnish National Museum. And there's links to our main publishing platforms, our Finna platform, and of course European, and we have Flickr and YouTube and Vimeo platforms in use as well. And of course we have our Instagram, so just follow our feeds and other social media. And I will not go deeper in our collections, but this press photo archive is quite special, and as it has some China-related material, I wanted to just include this in my presentation, because it's the biggest of our collections. It alone has about 14 or 15 million images, and even some China-related images, or even photo series from China from 1980s and 1990s. And I chose 2 quite interesting images, because this shows that China was there was relationship or some hints of Chinese culture in Helsinki, even in 1950s, because this one black and white photograph, it's taken in Hotel Zorni, which had a restaurant China. So this is just an example of this China-related examples of Chinese culture in our collections. But I think I will go to these most important China-related collections in our collections, and I have been talking about this Mannerheim collection, but because I think it's not so familiar to all, I just wanted to say a few words and show some images, because there's lots of interesting information about photography in China in the early 20th century as well. So Mannerheim was an officer of the Russian army of quite high rank, and he was born in 1867 and served in the Russian army from late 1890s till 1917. And he was chosen to be in charge of this Chinese expedition in 1906-1908. And it was organized and funded by Russian army. And of course, the main task of this Chinese expedition was to gain as much information as possible for Russian army, especially about northern borders of China. And for example, one of his tasks was to find possible marching routes for Russian army to enter China. But to at least partially to cover his main task, he did lots of research in China. This was actually also one of his personal interests. So he did ethnological fieldwork during his expedition, and collected objects and took over 1,000 photographs, and did some really interesting notes during his journey. And because he did this together with Finnish scholars, so he decided, and it was agreed, that he would donate and sell these items and photographs to our organization. So these items entered to our collections already during his journey in 1906 till 1908. And as you can see in my slide, there's about 1,000 objects and over 1,000 photographs. They are really interesting. And so he wrote his diary and make notes during his trip. So this is a good source for Chinese history and events of this border area. And it's really important they are published already also in English. So hope you all can get a copy of this across Asia from west to east, because it includes translation about his diary and interesting selection of his photographs. There's just a few examples, and I will show few images. This first is taken in Kurel Emissary in May 1907, and of course this picture itself, it's really interesting. But I think it's even more interesting that Mannerheim wrote a lot about photography together with his image. And as you can see, he wrote actually in his diary, "My photographs of the superior and the oldest lamas achieved great success. They were passed round from hand to hand, producing much merriment among the inhabitants of the monastery, of whom 99% had certainly never seen a photograph before. thanks to this good impression, I got them to allow me to photograph a service. And this, of course, means that Mannerheim had to develop negatives and make prints at the monastery. So he had to all chemicals and equipment with him. So this, I think there's a lot about photography and this ethnographical field work in China in the early 20th century. And of course, it's really interesting image. And there are, of course, lots of this kind of really interesting image telling about life in the border areas of China, and of course about political events as well. And this second image about Prince Lan at his desk, it's really interesting as well, because it's taken in Urumqi, which is part of Uyghur region. This is just an example that Mannerheim, because of his route, he met many ethnic minorities also in China and documented their daily life in his diary and photographs. So Prince Lan was one of these interesting politicians or people in high places Mannerheim met. Lan was part of a royal family, and he was exiled because of his one of his key role in Boxer Rebellion. And Mannerheim makes really interesting notes about Lan and his opinions about current situation in China. But as my topic is photography, I will skip these notes. You can all read them in this published book. But there's notes about photography and Lan as well, because Mannerheim tells, for example, that his camera went on strike at the moment he should have taken a photograph of Lan. And Mannerheim finally managed to take a photo, and Lan just laughed and explained that he understood these difficulties, as he also was an amateur photographer. And this is also interesting information that Lan was an amateur photographer at that time, because I think perhaps someone knows even if these photographs of this Prince Lan may even exist today in some museum or archive. I think this kind of photographs would be really, really interesting to see. I don't know if they exist, but anyhow, there's this kind of hints in Mannerheim's diary about photography. But as my main topic is FELM, so this Finnish Evangelical Lutheran Mission, there's basic information about FELM. So it was an agency of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland for its international work, and it was founded already in 1850s, and its original plans was to work with Finno-Ugric people in Russia, mainly in Siberia. But this was forbidden for many reasons, probably because of this religion. It was Russia was of course Orthodox, and this FELM was Evangelical Lutheran. So after all, FELM was so forbidden to work in Russian Empire, and they had to find a new area. And finally, they decided to go to Southern Africa, and these first missionaries went to Amberland, today's Namibia, where work started in 1870. And they had lots of difficulties and sickness, and only a few contacts outside this territory of Ondonga tribe. So this was one of the reasons they wanted to find another area for their missionary work. But still, they continued in Southern Africa, and there has been a long relationship between, for example, this Namibian Evangelical Lutheran Church and this FELM. So we have in our collection, for example, images from Namibia from probably not from 1870s, but 1880s till 1990s or so. But Finally, the first missionaries of FELM went to China in 1902, and I was talking about these two images in this last work, last seminar with Maya and you, but probably we can discuss this kind of issues later. So let's see. FELM, they had plans originally to start their work in Manchuria, but for some reason they decided to go elsewhere, and they decided to open their first stations in Jinshi in Hunan province. And I think I will read this original explanation how they decided to open their station in Jinshi, because this is from an article written by Hannes Sjöblom in actually 1902. In that he explains how he found that Jinshi would be a good place for their work in China. So he tells this story as, I set out on my first journey of exploration on December 8th, 1902. I rented a small Chinese boat. A friendly local Mandarin officer sent 3 soldiers, armed with a total of 1 old rusty Chinese sword, to guard my humble person. We first traveled about 25 kilometers down the river Yen and then turned to northern waters. Province began to look wealthy and densely populated. I arrived as late as December 13th at the first and my main destination of my journey, Jinshi. When I arrived, there were a magnificent sight that met me, dense forest of masts in the harbor and innumerable houses. So finally, Sjöblom suggested the board of FELM that work should begin in Jinshi, and it was accepted. So this was the start of their work. And I will show some examples of these images he took, because as soon as he arrived in Jinshi and even earlier, it began to take photographs and even collected photographs from missionary colleagues from different countries. For example, this image taken probably on Wesley Mission, it was published already in 1902. So actually, this is a letter from China published even before they opened their own first missionary station in China. And this is, of course, good for us because these magazines of FELM, they are digitized and can be found and openly read at the Helsinki University platform. But before going to these photographs, there's this one slide about these objects related to FELM, because as soon as they started their work in China, of course, they started to collect money for their work. And one way to collect money was, of course, to send some objects from China, for example, to Finland. And this was also one way for our National Museum to acquire original objects from China. For example, this teapot and other objects, they were bought in spring 1907 at the fair organized by FELM. And actually, I found from our catalogs that they bought from these, actually, it was 6 items for about, in total, 70 Finnish marks, which is about 300 euros. So this kind of information shows that this FELM and their missionaries were quite important for our museums as well, already in the early 20th century. And of course, these missionaries collected other items. For example, this coin collection, it ended up in our collection already in 1930s. It has about, let's see, about over 1,000 Chinese coins, and only a few have been digitized and published on Finna and Europeana. So it would be a really interesting collection to digitize all of them. But of course, this film collected and acquired lots of objects and photographs to their own collections, and they even opened their own museum in 1930s, and it was closed in 2014. These collections include collections mainly from Namibia and China. But even before this, their own museum, they arranged a travel exhibition in 1911 to 1912. And this image photograph, it's taken in one of these exhibitions, showing how China and Chinese culture was exhibited in Finland in the 1910s. We have lots of them in our collections, and it's also, I think most of them can be found already on Europeana, so it tells about reactions and how Chinese culture was exhibited. And I will, because this is a really interesting example of this reactions towards Chinese culture in Finland of that time. So I will read again an article published on a newspaper Etelä-Suomi in 1912 about this exhibition. So it was about exhibition in Kotka in eastern Finland. So it goes that Evangelical prayer house in Kotka has in these days offered audience rare and interesting things to see. Visitors have been able to get to know cultural phenomena of the heathen world, as well as those with more advanced, some of which in their artistry, especially the field of painting, astonish European cultural people. The show as a whole is wonderfully diverse, especially in terms of the exhibition Chinese section, which is owned by the missionary Erland Sihvonen, who organizes the exhibition. He has managed to acquire in his 9 years of existence in China for himself a collection which is worth every person to know more about it. Besides, every person who wants more information about the collection, Reverend Sihvonen is eager to share his information to everyone. So I think people were really interested to know more about China and Chinese culture in that time. And of course, this kind of interest was probably one of the reasons why FELM opened this museum. But as the museum was closed in 2014, they had to decide what to do with these collections. And finally, all of them were donated to us. So these objects, about 9,000 objects, were donated to our National Museum, and about 160,000 photographs came to our collections. And of course, these big collections would not have been possible to take over to us if they wouldn't have put resources to catalog and even digitize a selection of them. So this was really good for us, because digitizing, for example, a small selection of these 160,000 images gave us a chance to publish a selection of these images already a few years ago and publish them on Finna and Europeana. So there have been, even before PAGODE, about 2,000 images published on Finland, European from this film collection. And there's more hints and information about how important this film and their work and these images were for Finns and knowledge about China and Chinese culture in Finland. Because as I mentioned, this film published these stories and images from Finnish missionaries in their own magazine. But I suppose many of these images were used in other newspapers, such as in this published in 1911 in Helsingin Sanomat, because as you can compare these images, it's very probable that, for example, this image in the middle may have taken by Hannes Sjöblom, because there's lots of similarities. But of course, we don't know if who these images have taken, and this would be good topic for some students to do research, how these images really were used and circulated in, for example, in Finland and different magazines in Finland. But I suppose they were really, really evaluated sources of information about China and Chinese culture. But yes, do I have time? Because I have been talking so much, but let's see.
So it's 3:05. You still have maybe 10 minutes to talk, and then a 15-minute discussion.
Yes, I will go quite fast, because I wanted to tell something about these photographers. I selected 4 of them to give an impression of which kind of background these photographers had. There's 4 of them, and I will tell and show some images taken by them. But of course, there was lots of different people taking photographs in China, because there were lots of Finnish missionaries and their families, and among them were, of course, female missionaries, because this was important for Finnish film to send, as well as men, women to China to work with locals. So this is one example of this Reverend Hannu Hahti. He was the vice director of the film and did inspection tour in China in 1913 to 1940s, and took really, really expressive and interesting images, both during his time in Namibia and in China. And of course, this photography in China, as I thought, was much easier, because there was lots of equipment in hand and chemicals to be found. So it was really quite easy, and they had good cameras, and so these are really expressive and interesting images. And of course, he used mainly glass plates. And what's interesting is that he dated his images on these glass plates. You actually could follow his trip in China with the help of these images, because they are dated. And there's lots of interesting details, such as in these images. So this is just a glimpse of this collection, and I hope you can dive to this film collection, for example, in Finland and in European, and use them. And this is one of my favorites, as you can see, because I just couldn't stop looking at this image, and it's really, really expressive. Okay. And of course, we were talking about context and background information about these images, and there's lots of really interesting topics, such as these wives witnessing their innocence. I don't actually know what they are doing and what the background of this is, but really interesting images. And just an example of our solution to publish as much as possible from our collection with existing metadata and information. So we are hoping to get more information, for example, to these images and our collections in general, and that way enrich and correct our information. Because as you understand, we have lots of images, and to put effort to few images would not be so good for all of us. So we have decided to publish them without going too deep in these details. So we are really grateful for all feedback we can get from our audiences. And second photographer was Hannes Sjöblom. There's a few images taken by him. They are really interesting as well. He was also pioneer of the film and was there twice, in 1901, 1906, and again in 1912 and 1915. He was in charge of Yinshi mission station, and even later returned to China after he have stopped working in film and started his own business in China. So as you can see from these topics, it's really interesting images, and this is already familiar image to some of you, but tells more about this contextualization and working with these images, because this is actually one image I was checking, and our original information was that there's Buddhist monks, but as you can see, you can quite easily notice that these are Tibetan monks, and this is good for us because we have my colleagues at the National Museum of Finland, which are in charge of these ethnographical or ethnological collections, and I was talking with one of them and got lots of new information about this information. But of course, still I don't know who these monks are, and hopefully, for example, this young lama in the middle of this image could be recognized, and we could put his name in our metadata. Perhaps somebody later will recognize who these really are. And this is taken in Hanko, which is nowadays Wuhan. And third one is Tolvo Koskikallio. He was already also a long time in China, from 1920s actually to 1947, when he left China and went to Hong Kong and Taiwan and continued work there. We have his original nitrate negatives and of course some glass plates as well. And this is a collection we have been concentrating in this PAGODE, because we have digitized about 400 of these original nitrate negatives during PAGODE, and they offer really interesting images about places, people, monuments, and sites, and especially about Kuling. It's interesting that we are using this name Kuling, as you can see in my slide, but actually in English it's Guling in Lushan mountain area, and this is today one of these World Heritage sites. And Kuling itself, it's really interesting. It was a sanitarium for Western people, and these Finnish missionaries as well as other missionaries spent this warm season in Kuling and traveled around and spent their leisure time there. And for example, Tolvo Koskikallio was really eager to document and take photographs of all these monuments and views around Kulin. So we have lots of them and have been digitizing, and we'll publish them on Europeana as well. But you will find more information about this Kulin in the internet if you are looking for more information. But this is just an example of Koskikallio's photographs of interesting events and people he met, because this is Mandarin and he's in Turas in Hunan province in 1923. And here, again, lots of interesting details in this image. And this is a fourth photographer, Elin Kollan. He went to China in 1908 and again spent lots of time there. He was teaching and did evangelistic work and different stations. And these two images are again one of my favorites because they are really, really nice. I personally like them a lot. And I will tell shortly about this film and what kind of events they had in China in 1920s and 1930s, 40s. But of course, this film collection has lots of images about this daily life of missionaries and film. And they had a hospital, schools, kindergarten, and did social services. So there's only few examples of images of this kind of actions and work. And of course, there's lots of sensitive issues as well when we are talking about, for example, social services and hospitals and this kind of events and work. But I think my time is running out, so I will skip them. And it's of course interesting to notice that they used also local photography studios. For example, these two are taken by local photographers. Really nice example of portraits or group photographs of 1910s and 1920s. And interesting frames, I would say, is a nice example of photography style. And again, because of course, most of these images in our collections, we are missing names of these photographers. And it can be that this image of people watching something, it would be really nice to know what they are watching, what's going on in this pond, or I don't know, perhaps it's a river in Lushan mountain, because I think there are Chinese, but mostly these are Europeans watching some performance or something. And this can be taken by Finnish Missionary or some European or even Chinese, because I think they circulated this kind of images and changed them. But again, interesting and gives thoughts and ideas and questions. What's happening? Well, of course, because film worked in China in 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s, it was really interesting, but at the same time, really difficult and troubled times. And there's lots of stories. I think I don't have enough time to go deeper in these stories, but what kind of happenings, or what happened to these missionaries, for example, during this revolution in 1920s? They were, for example, beaten, and they had really difficult times. And of course, civil war itself. And there's these images of Tajung station and church. It was one of the biggest hit towards FELM, because this station ended in the middle of battles between these troops, and finally these communist troops won this battle, and this is how it ended. This station was totally ruined and robbed by locals. They took as much as they could from this station, and original, well, later it was abandoned. But there's this image of this parish of this Tajung in front of this ruined church. I think it's. Would be nice to know what they have written in this image, but tells that it was really a shock for them that their station and church was ruined.
Ismo, maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
Yes. So, of course, this area where they worked was quite central part of China, and they ended actually quite close to these battles between Chinese troops and Japanese in the 1930s. And there's, of course, lots of different stories about what happened to these Finnish missionaries. I think none of them were killed, but quite badly beaten, and they had difficult experiences. But of course, this is really interesting that these Finnish missionaries were in the middle of these events. So far, I haven't found, and I don't know if we have any, at least good photographs, for example, about these Japanese troops entering China. But this one about 2 battleships, it was taken by Tolvo Koskikallio in some of these Chinese ports, showing a Japanese and American naval ship in the 1930s. So I think these events interested these missionaries. And finally, my topic was working with China images and pagode. I won't have time to read this story from Paula Laajalahti, but Paula has done so much work for us, mostly voluntarily, because I don't know if Paula is with us today, but he was retired for FELM, and he asked us that how he could help, because he's interested to help and work with these images even he is retired. So now she has spent a couple of years going through this film collection and catalog over 10,000 images, and he has asked her friends and old colleagues information about these images and names and places. So we have got lots of information about these images, and without help of Paula, this would have not been possible. So it's really big help, and I'm really thankful for Paula for her work. And I think this sentence written by Paula is really good, because his hope as well as our is that people both in Finland and abroad would find these precious images and would delve in the history of missionary society and its partners, and of course these cultures, for example, culture of China and Chinese events through these images. And one thing Paula did in Pagode, he went through lots of original photo albums, because this has not been originally digitized or cataloged. So he selected images, interesting images from these albums. And there's still lots of work to be done in these albums, but they are really interesting part of this collection. And of course, this is just an example joining our knowledge, because I would thank Elisa for her information and translation of these texts, because this is just an example that our knowledge of, for example, Chinese language, it doesn't actually exist, and many of these images has captions in Chinese written in them, and translating them gives already lots of background. So, for example, without translating these images, we would have not known that what kind of context or relationship these original images are, and now we know that they are actually part of this Sino-Tibetan relationship of the 1920s. And of course, as I told, we would be really happy to get feedback and more information. This is just an example of one of these images by Tolvo Koskikallio. It's taken in Hunan province, but actually we don't know which town or city it is. Probably somebody will recognize and tell us, so we can put it to our collection management system, and it can be published when we are renewing our interest in Finna and on European as well, because that way it would tell more about China and its history. So finally, about this use and reuse of these collections. So we are publishing them on Finna and of course on European, and on Finna we are publishing these high resolution images as well, and they are uploadable there, so everybody can upload and use almost in what way they really want. But of course we are hoping sustainable and well good use, and that everybody would take care of these sensitive issues when they are using these images. And so this is how we are publishing them on European. These are mostly tier 4. All of our images are mostly tier 4, and we are using this Koko ontology. It is part of Finnish USO, and this means that we are publishing our terms, ontologies in 3 different languages: Finnish, Swedish, and English. And this Finnish Press Archive collection, joka has even captions in 2 languages, in Finnish and in English. So thank you, and this was so much information. I think I would have been able to talk another hour or so, but hopefully you got lots of ideas and questions and well topics to discuss. So I think we have now time to discuss, and perhaps if you have any questions, so I try to answer. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ismo. If anybody has questions, you can either post them directly. We are not that many, so you perhaps just turn your microphone on, or you can ask your question in the chat window. So just to break the ice, perhaps I can ask a very quick, simple question. The captions that we saw, for example, except the one wives looking at their innocence and so on, were these the captions that were given by the photographers, the missionary photographers themselves, or is it something that Paula added as she went through the selection of photos, or where do they come from?
Well, it varies a lot. Some of them have been written by these photographers themselves. Some are captions used, for example, in these magazines or books where these images have been published. And I forgot to tell that I have to read this because, yeah, if you want to take a more look about this film collection and these images, the selection of these images and stories behind them and stories about film were published in a book called To the East and South, Missionaries as Photographers. It's published already in 1995. And this is, of course, published in different languages. It has texts in Finnish, Swedish, English, and Chinese. So it's a good source for this film collection. And some of these captions I put in my presentation are from this book, but some of them are original captions by photographers, and some are from Paula, and some are even perhaps from my captions or translations. Yeah.
Okay. Antonella, please.
I have more a comment than a real question, and it becomes more and more evident, in my opinion, how much is important is in our case, in the case of Pagode and Chinese cultural heritage, to have specific expertise in the group. I guess that opening the process of opening the collections to the wider public is something that is becoming more and more complex as long as these collections do not relate only to local heritage, but to European heritage, which is already a challenge because we are, at least my generation was not educated with the European view. So I was educated with the history of Italy and just bits and pieces of the rest of the world. Now more and more we talk about Europe, but it has arrived at a time to go beyond Europe, also in consideration of the fact that many European cultural heritage institutions have heritage from other regions in the world, and considering the fact that luckily now that we are out of the pandemic, people are traveling and they are coming from, people from outside Europe are coming to Europe to look at Europe, but also to recognize themselves in the collections of their countries. And I think that there is an enormous work to be done to document correctly these collections that are not built in Europe, but arrived to Europe from different ways, to document these collections correctly, because the risk otherwise is that they remain just as objects in the warehouse, both physical or digital. So my impression is that a competence of heritage from other regions of the world is more and more demanded. And this is probably an area where we are still lacking expertise.
Yes, perhaps I can comment directly to you because I agree, and I think there's a of course, when, for example, when we are cataloging and publishing these, for example, images from China and other areas of, well, non-European cultures, and we are, for example, if we are publishing these original captions, we can be in difficulties because there's, of course, well, we are talking about this, how, for example, Finns or missionaries, how they reacted to Chinese and China cultures. And of course, there's aspects of colonialism inside these reactions as well. So this kind of topics are really important to recognize when we are publishing these collections. But even though just to publish them with as relevant information as possible, it's of course best way for us to publish our common heritage. And I think this expertise and, well, to combine our knowledge is best way, and not to do any mistakes, at least no major mistakes when we are publishing, for example, these images, because there can be really sensitive issues in some of these photographs. We just don't know and just publish them, and it can be even an insult to some people if we don't know that. Yeah.
Thank you. Sophie has a question as well.
Hi, Ismo.
Hi.
You always manage to totally take my breath away with your pictures, and a few of those that you showed, among which the one where people are looking at that pond. I mean, this one could go into the exhibition straight away. Such an amazing image. I was thinking while you were talking, you would like to find out more. We would like to know these stories behind these pictures, the untold stories, the things that we cannot see. I was thinking, who would you need for that, and what would you need for that? And I think Antonella also touched already a little bit on that, the expertise, knowledge. To a certain extent, of course, we can also help making these collections a little bit more discoverable and reusable by adding non-expertise keywords. I mean, there are a lot of things that non-specialists such as myself could describe in terms of photographic qualities and keywords and objects and that sort of stuff. And the way to go perhaps would be like a crowdsourcing campaign like the ones we're already doing in PAGODE. It will be an added bonus in any case, because your images are so narrative. They have their own story. It's up to us to give some words to those stories. So I think we can, even without expertise knowledge, do already a lot. But as a second part of it, real experts, of course, deliver valuable information that help us not fall into the ethical pitfalls that you mentioned, because as non-specialists, we run the risk of assessing something in a slightly off way. And this is why I wanted to perhaps extend a question to my colleague at CADOC Archive. I don't know if Karine Dujardin is still online with us. I have the impression that she knows this Chinese collection of CADOC really, really well. And I was wondering if she knows other curators, other historical, sociological specialists, or a network even of such people who could perhaps contribute to tagging pictures like these. I'm kind of calling out of the blue to Karine. I haven't discussed this with her, but yeah, where would you get that knowledge? It's not so prevalent, I think. Karine, I see you.
Yeah, that would be nice to know.
Is there such a thing as a network of China cultural, historical, archival, museal, curatorial specialists who somehow could be engaged in a tagging or an annotation activity? I cannot hear.
Yeah, Karine, please. I mean, I see your microphone is on as well as your camera, but.
Sorry, do you?
Yes, you're there.
Hello?
Hey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I did not. Can you maybe shortly repeat the question, because I was.
Well,
So you were asking for a network. You were asking for a network for metadata.
While Ismo was showing the pictures, I thought, okay, but what kind of people would you need to really have the knowledge of, okay, that lake in Luan, that's what it's about, or that event in 1895, that's what that about. You need such a specific expertise that I was wondering where to find it in a condensed or a good dose.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question, and I think a very relevant question for the whole collection. And actually, following the presentation, which I really enjoyed, thank you very much, Ismo. I had a comparable question in the sense related to the content, because a very interesting element is that the China collection, which is preserved at PAGODE, and which will also partly be presented in PAGODE and in Europeana, concerns a region close to the Hunan region. So it's a region where the Franciscan missionaries have been active. So the Hubei region, the Belgian Franciscans has been working there, but in the Hunan region, Italian Franciscans has been working there. And we have, related to the content, we have interesting archives concerning that region. So my question to Ismo is related to the content. Were there references also to the Catholic presence in that region? Because I think from a research also and a perspective of metadata, so the comparative perspective is always very important. So
yes, and of course I could put only a few images from this very vast collection in my presentation, but yes, there's information about these Catholic missionaries in this area, and of course when we are talking about context and background to these images, it's good to know that these archives of FELM, they have been preserved as well, but they are in the Finnish National Archive. And of course, their magazine gives some information and background to some of these images and events, such as this in 1935. But to these Catholic missionaries, there's well, information, at least, is the history books of or histories of FELM about this complexity of this relationship with Evangelical Lutheran mission and Catholic mission, because I think they were competing with each other in this area. So, but I remember some images about Catholic missionaries in this FELM collection. Mm-hmm. So there were some hints about these Catholic mission in Hunan area in this collection.
Thank you. Maybe I can ask something to the question of Sophie. So I think important for the metadata, I think you need a cooperation. You need an intense cooperation between the heritage perspective and the research perspective. I think, and maybe also the participative perspective from the local community, from the source, from the source communities. And maybe I can refer to an initiative which has been taken at PAGODE since a couple of years, and that's the Mimora Research Academy. And that's the idea of is indeed to connect these expertise, I think, these different expertises. So listening to Ismo, I was thinking about ideas in the future to connect and I mean, I think this is a huge project, but I think it has to be made in order to be able to metadata and to add metadata, to add content, to add. So it's a huge project, but it's necessary. There is a big necessity, I think, and but it's also very innovative and inspiring. So I think it's a project, an interesting project for the future. So I think I would like to invite you to go on the website of PAGODE and look at Mimora.
I will try.
Have the combination of these perspectives. So we
That's
are
exactly
thinking
what
of
I was inquiring about, Karin. So thank you so much for that. And you are right. The importance and the impact of something like that could actually be huge, because what Ismo and his team have now done is an immense first step, but we can see that there is potential for much more. So it would be a pity to leave it there.
Yeah. And this was actually one of my ideas, to present the opportunities to use and to get more information and more impact from this collection, because Sophie, you are totally right. We have just started to work with this vast collection, and actually it's of course just one of our many collections, but it has really international importance. So I think PAGODE itself and European China itself, it's of course good way to open and this collection and get people to know that it really exists and they can have access and can use it, and of course can correct and give us feedback and more information and more context and background. And of course, I have to mention that, of course, Finnish Museum, they have been really interested in this collection and has used a selection of it already in their exhibitions and in their work. And this kind of international cooperation, of course, it's really important, because I think, for example, Finnish Museum knows probably best about these places and event from Chinese perspective. So it would be really nice.
I think that collections such as yours, Ismo, where you actually see documented in photographs everyday life, special events, historical figures, they are not so numerous in Europeana. So I think it's with PAGODE that some of these collections are coming in. Of course, there is the John Thomson collection. There are a few of the Scandinavian museums that have picture collections, but they are less numerous than, for instance, the collections of artifacts. Of course, the artifacts are also photographed, but you understand what I mean. It's a different kind than this documentary and photography and snapshots and even studio photography. So I think there's a real connection to be made between your archive, PAGODE's archive, a few of the Swedish museums already in Europeana. The Welcome collection has a very nice photographic portfolio documenting life in China in previous decades. I think Karin is right. There is a bigger and a really ambitious project somewhere in this. And what could come out of it is a view of China that not the Chinese community and not the European community has seen so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if we imagine to complement these collections, photographic collections in archives and museums with community-owned collections, so looking for collections that are in the hands of an amateur photographer, a family album, the album of a person who had some relationship with the China, or a Chinese who had a relationship with Europe. I guess that there is an enormous and a very interesting area of investigation, experimentation, participatory activities that we can further develop. Yeah, it is really attracting, a very attracting idea.
Yeah, if I may add something.
Yes, please, Corinne.
I think really this is a unique, if you think about a collection from an outside perspective, I think it's a unique collection. It's also an authentic collection. So as has been said, it's a collection which is not known in China. It's an authentic and historical collection going back to the early 19th century. So as I mentioned 2 days ago or last week, there is a diplomatic, it can be used in exchange, global exchange or exchange between Europe and China. I think there is a lot of interesting things can be done from. So I think we have to take in mind, and there is a lot of work still to do, but there is also a lot of opportunities in this collection.
Yeah. And of course, one thing which would be really good to do, because as probably many of you have noticed, we are publishing this film collection with captions in Finnish. Of course, this is not the best solution, and but to translate all of them to English, or what would be the best to Chinese, it's so big task for us that unfortunately that's something we cannot do. But just to tag these images with relevant keywords in English. Of course, we are using these 3 languages, but there's only a few keywords, and putting more keywords in English, and of course to get relevant people to put their information and effort to increase this background and information about this and other collections. Yeah.
But also about the languages, ISMO, we now are currently involved in a project where we are validating automated translations. It's actually working quite well. I mean, the results are surprisingly good. So I think, again, in terms of quantity and performance, AI now really can help you take a huge jump forward in having at least the Finnish metadata translated in a few more languages.
Yeah. I think that's one solution to increase the use of these, for example, this collection. Yeah. Just to use languages which end users can understand and use. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Maybe somebody else, any other questions? No? Okay, then I would like to thank you all. I think this was a really productive debate at the end. Maybe even with some follow-up practical results, that would be wonderful. Before we press this end button, I would like to remind you all that this was our first online event in the series of events of PAGODE Festival, and that you can check also all the following events at the link that I've just sent. And our next PAGODE Festival event will be held on the 15th of June. So you're all welcome to join us and to also invite somebody else to join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ismo. It was a pleasure to listen to your presentation.
No, it was my pleasure. Yeah. And as I said, I would have been really could have continued for another hour too. Yeah, but yeah, this was good start.
Next time we'll do an ISMO festival.
Yeah. Okay.
Creative mind.
Yes. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.